Congratulations, you just got hired at Southwest. Now what? When you go to Indoc, you're probably gonna get asked to sign up for a bunch of different options for disability, health plans, all sorts of things. So what do you actually select? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll go through disability, health plans, and insurance. We'll talk about the 401k and a couple other things sprinkled in there. Charlie, do you want to start us off?
Well, I'll first tell you that about almost exactly 19 years ago, John, I was sitting in the Southwest new hire classrooms and with my wife, and they were talking about the benefits team comes in and they're like, all right, here's all your benefits and let's sign up. And I had no clue about anything. I didn't know what any of the words meant, and I didn't know what any of the disability acronyms were. But you and I are going to try to at least educate a little bit so you can make some decent choices during that day because I was clueless. And there's some decisions like you've mentioned that have implications that are sometimes irreversible, which is weird, right?
Yeah.
But uh, but yeah, so you're thinking about disability, and when you sign up for that, there's a couple choices that I'll just throw out there. You know, the acronyms are terrible, right? STD. You hear that acronym for the first time, you're gonna question that, but it's short-term disability, and you have a couple choices there in the new contract. Short-term, actually, you don't have a couple choices on short-term disability. The choice is you have it or you don't have it, right? And then there's long-term disability, uh, Part A, long-term disability A, or long-term disability B. You can talk to those a little bit more. The other one is loss of license. And the choice there is if I do, in fact, lose my license, do I get that benefit tax free or taxable? And I'll describe that in just a couple seconds here and then hand it off to you. But basically, the IRS wants their money on the front end or the back end. So if you pay the taxes on loss of license, just the taxes, and on the imputed income, that's confusing. But just think of it this way: if you pay taxes on the front end, then if you receive the loss of license benefit, it'll be tax free. If you don't pay the taxes on the imputed income on the front end, then the benefit you receive will be taxable. So maybe that can help remember at least, what your choices are. John, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're in a disability situation, like I happen to be, lost my medical. I was a captain for a while,
Mhm.
not at Southwest, but if you get that money tax-free when you're disabled, it can be pretty close to what you were getting anyway
Mhm.
before you were disabled because of the taxes, if it was non-taxable.
Yeah. Yeah, clearly, and like you said, the more money you make as your income goes up, your taxes become a bigger part of that. So as a new hire, you might think, well, that's not that much difference, but very quickly, within a couple few years, that tax piece will be very large. And to me, John, the way I think about it is somebody told me one time, they said, I don't want to pay taxes if I don't have to. And I said, well, for me, I do want to pay that tax on that for loss of license because to me, it's like buying extra disability insurance. In this case, extra, I get more loss of license insurance. And as a pilot, the biggest risk for pilots is disability, because I think the statistics are pretty high that I can't remember the exactly, percentage, but a lot of pilots at one time in their career will be on disability for a certain amount of time, not permanently disabled, but you will go on disability probably during your career, statistically speaking. So it's very important. One of the biggest risks for pilots.
Yeah, the disability at Southwest is very good,
Mm.
thankfully, but there are a bunch of options to choose from
Yeah.
or think about. So short-term disability, STD, is 14-day elimination period, and then it covers you for 40 up to 46 days. So that total period is 60 days. And why that's important is because loss of license kicks in at 60 days. So that and loss of license is 50% of your pre-disability earnings. However, if you're a new hire, you're like, hey, I just got hired. I don't have 12
Yeah.
months of pre-disability earnings for this to
Mhm.
calculate off of. So you
Mhm.
actually get 110 TFP times your current pay rate if you're disabled within the first 2 years.
Hmm.
to help with that. Because obviously, if you've only been there for 6 months and you
Yeah,
get disabled, you would not be making very much money on disability if they didn't have that.
absolutely. So John, just the disability, you and I could talk on that for an hour. There's a lot of moving parts there, but the choices that somebody makes when they're sitting in that classroom at Southwest Airlines, like I was 19 years ago, your choices are going to be short-term disability. Do I have it or do I not have it? And I think we would recommend for most people that they would have that. There's reasons later down the road, maybe several years, that you may not use it anymore. But as a new hire, I personally would select short-term disability. Loss of license, we talked about your options there. And John, it's really hard for you and I to give specific recommendations because in that classroom and your new hire classmates, there's going to be people with military disability. There's going to be people with large emergency funds, and or there'll be people that, like me, we took a big pay cut, and I was struggling that first year, so I needed lots of insurance to help make up for my shortage of cash flow and emergency funds. So hopefully that's a framework for people to think about how to select these insurances. In general, if you're low on cash, as a new hire might be, from that transition is hard, then maybe picking more insurance could be helpful. And then as your career progresses, as your balance sheet gets stronger, as your pay goes up, if you have larger emergency funds, larger savings, then you're kind of self-insured in some areas. Maybe you could reduce some a little bit way down the road, maybe.
Yeah.
So those are things, and that might help with the long-term disability A versus long-term disability B. But as you noted, if you go long-term disability A, which is the lower amount, it's sometimes difficult to then transition to long-term disability B because you have to have a medical, right? A statement of health, John.
Yeah, so we've had some clients who've tried to switch from long-term A to long-term B, and they haven't been able to do it, even for like very small things.
Yeah.
So it can be very difficult if you're
Mhm.
not on short-term disability or if you're not on long-term B. It can be very difficult to get on those later
Yeah.
because they do require statements of health and they check your medical history and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Absolutely.
loss of license is 50% of your pre-disability earnings for the last 12 months. Long-term A gives you an extra 10% on top of that.
Mhm.
And then long-term B, starting in the seventh month, gets you an extra five on top of that. So long-term B comes to 15% extra. And then long-term A is 10% extra. And then loss of license is 50%. So the max you can get would be on long-term B at 65% of your pre-disability earnings.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. And those have caps. The long-term A has a cap. It doesn't go on forever as your pay goes up, and so does long-term B. But long-term B's cap is much higher. But yeah, so that's very helpful for folks, John. We hope anyway. But I'll tell you right now, I'm going to pass out your email address so they can email you, call you, whatever, Jonathan at leadingedgeplanning.com, and just say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Help me out. And I know you could do that. I could do the same as well. Charlie at leadingedgeplanning.com too. We're happy to help with those questions.
Yeah, we got a whole spreadsheet we can walk through your
Yeah.
specific situation and you can see what it would look like.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think next we want to talk about the different health plans and insurance. So there's a bunch of different opinions on those, but Charlie, why don't you start?
Yeah.
Tell us about the regular plan.
Yeah, so the regular plan. So you're sitting in your new hire classroom with your classmates, wondering what the heck, regular plan, choice plus, choice C, health savings plan, health savings account, what the heck, flex savings account, all these to me, which were very new programs, never heard of any of them before, pretty much coming from the military. The regular plan, I'll start with that one. We could again talk about all of these plans for an hour or more. But the regular plan it's what's called a grandfathered ACA or pre-Obamacare health care plan. And so the regular plan is pretty popular at Southwest. I'm not saying it's right for everyone, but the thing that makes it so popular, John, is the premium is zero. So that's kind of nice. That's kind of, especially again, if you're a new hire, you're a little low on cash flow, maybe like I was, and that's not such a bad thing. Now, I think there are some, just like everything, John, there's trade-offs, pros, cons. The regular plan does not pay, like the other plans we'll talk about in a minute, it does not pay for a preventative, some of those kinds of things. So just think about your circumstances and where you are in life. I'll try to generalize a little bit. The regular plan is, I think, pretty good for. I remember talking to a friend of mine, and he's like, "Hey, we're in the process of moving. We've changed bases, and so it's a very expensive process. My kid's on some medications. We've got some ongoing health things. We're low on cash flow right now." And I thought the regular plan was a great plan for those circumstances, just in general. The other plans, you have three bunched together, and they're called the Benefits Plus program. So the Benefits Plus, you got three over there, regular plan, kind of all by its lonesome over here because it's a grandfathered plan. So the other three Benefits Plus programs, you got Choice Plus, Choice C, and Health Savings Plan. Again, we could go through all those and spend an hour on each one of them, but they are going to have premiums, and some are much higher premiums. So again, depending on your healthcare needs, in general, there's a rule of thumb, if you will, like if you're healthy, you've got pretty good cash flow, some pretty good savings, then the health savings plan might work. It's a high deductible plan, John. To me, that's like raising my deductibles on my car insurance, my home insurance, because I have cash to cover those. So there's also some tremendous tax benefits on the health savings plan because you get a health savings account. However, that shouldn't drive your decision, right? Just like a premium of zero may not drive your decision. It's your healthcare situation and circumstances. The last thing I'll say, because again, we could go on, but the one interesting thing, one very important thing is that if you're on the regular plan, you are limited to life insurance at Southwest Insurance for $950,000. You're going to get the $800,000 life insurance policy by contract. You could also sign up for an extra optional 150 on top of that if you're on the regular plan. So 950 max. If you're on the other plans, the Benefits Plus plans, you can get up to the 800,000 that everyone gets and an additional 10 times your salary. So if you need a lot of life insurance and you don't have it on the outside of your employer, consider that limitation for the regular plan. We've seen that kind of bite people at times where they need life insurance. They don't have enough, especially if you're a young family. That's the time you need the most life insurance. But John, I could go on. I'll stop right there. Well, any ways to summarize that and help people make that decision that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all good points. It depends on your health
Mhm.
and your cash flow needs, and also considering in the future, you may want to go get insurance outside of Southwest if
Yeah.
you think maybe you're going to choose the Choice Plus or Health Savings Plan, but you're thinking maybe the regular plan will be better for me down the road once my health situation changes. You may want to consider getting some insurance outside of Southwest in that case, because you will, as Charlie said, be limited
Yeah, you're talking about
eventually.
life insurance.
Yeah,
Like,
life
yeah,
insurance, yes.
absolutely. And this is a tough one. I mean, I think, and there's a lot of very opinionated folks that are very proud of their health insurance plans. John, I remember when in the fall during open enrollment on the crew van, you're going to get an earful of like what the best plan is from somebody else, and you're like, okay, that sounds good, but their circumstances might be very different than yours. So I think that's where you got to have some minimum, you got to do some minimum homework here and not just take somebody's word for what might be right for you. Again, shoot us an email, or you can even give us a call, 865-240-2292, select you or me. We'll try to give the most objective advice for your circumstances that we can. And I say try because I'm biased too, John. I have one that I like. I like the health savings plan. It fits our family's needs, but some people really like the regular plan and that fits them well, especially our military people. It really works well with TRICARE. So those are some other things too to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
I think next we'll talk about the 401k.
Hmm.
So you're going to have the option to start saving for retirement in the Southwest 401k. They're going to be giving you their 18% NEC, non-elective contribution.
Uh-huh.
All that means is Southwest is dumping 18% of your pay into the 401k, and you don't have to do anything. They just give it
Mhm.
to you. It's great. But if you want to save too, you can choose between Roth contributions or pre-tax contributions. So if you do Roth contributions, you put that money in and it grows and you never pay tax on it again. But you do pay the tax going into it. Now, if you do pre-tax, all that money goes in, you aren't taxed on it. It
Hmm.
grows, but when you pull it out, you are going to have to pay tax on it.
Yeah.
So the thing to think about is is your tax rate going to be greater in the future or smaller in the future or the
Mhm.
same? If it's going to be higher in the future, then it generally makes more sense to do Roth.
Mhm.
If it's going to be lower in the future, then it makes sense to do pre-tax.
Mhm.
Now, you're probably starting out at Southwest and you're probably going to make the least amount of money you'll ever make your first couple
Uh-huh.
years. So
Yeah.
Roth could be a good idea, but there's a money component to that. It'll cost you, if you're in the 22% tax bracket, about 53.90 a
Mhm.
year, which is a little over $200 a paycheck.
So
So
what you're
that
saying, John, is that your taxes are, you're going to pay more taxes, 5,390 per year, because you selected the Roth instead of the pre-tax.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, a little bit of a tax implication there, but
Mhm.
so it's either paying taxes now or paying taxes
Mhm.
later when you retired
Yeah.
or when you pull it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are
I
some
think that
things.
I think the thing that you said that's most important there, a couple of things is that you're going to, in general, if you think your tax bracket will be higher in the future, Roth now. It's like prepaying taxes at a lower rate, and that makes sense. Although, like you said, a little bit painful, maybe, but it does make sense mathematically. Let's prepay taxes at the lowest rate. Because most of the pilots we see, even in retirement, are making more than they made as brand new FOs. And that's awesome. So as a young pilot, it usually makes sense to do as much Roth as you can, but it's not a pain-free kind of thing as well, right? So consider the backdoor Roth. That's a whole nother, again, another discussion that we could spend an hour on. But let us know if you have questions on that. That is can be very valuable. And John, I'll throw this out to muddy the waters even more. If you really want to get aggressive and you're really a big fan of Roth money, which I am, you could even do Roth NEC these days. That's brand new for 2026. You could tell Southwest, hey, that 18% you're giving me, make it all Roth. You could do that. Again, this is not an avenue where we could give advice on that. It's very nuanced, but that's available. And you would pay tax on that money and prepay the taxes, which is, again, not pain free, but could very well pay off way down the road. So it's something to consider as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Charlie, when you were going through Indoc and selecting all these things, you also had to select non-qualified
Yeah.
payout. And do you
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I almost forgot. I don't know, and John, I haven't talked to a new hire lately, but again, in the contract and things, I'm not sure it's still a thing where you have to choose this that early on. I think it is. For example, when some of our pilots are, let's say, around 60, it might make sense to use some of the deferred compensation, non-qualified retirement programs, depending on their tax situation. So it's interesting though, because I remember sitting there as a new hire and one of the choices was, hey, if 25 years down the road, you choose to participate in the non-qualified retirement plans, there's three of them. Do you want your money in retirement in one lump sum, spread out over 5 years, or anything in between? And I was clueless. All of us were clueless. Like, what are you even talking about? So, in general, if that's still an option, it may make sense to spread that, distribution out that you're going to receive at retirement from the deferred compensation that you participated in. You're going to get that money back, and it might make sense to get that money back from age 65 to 70. That's a really nice way to start your first 5 years in retirement. If you select lump sum, that money will be taxed heavily that first year of your retirement. So those are just things to think about. That's a tough decision to make 20 plus years in advance, possibly. I don't even know if they're still asking that question. I think they are, but it's really hard to know even what those programs are, much less how I should select how to receive the money in 20 plus years, depending on how old somebody is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks
Mhm.
for that, Charlie.
Yeah.
Is there any other questions that Southwest new hire may be asking?
Not that I can remember, John. I think hopefully we covered the things at a really basic surface level. Again, just trying to educate a little bit so somebody has the framework to make a decision. But again, any of these little topics we covered, we could spend an hour on each of them alone. We don't expect someone to do that, of course. You've got other things. You're in new hire training. You're trying to learn the systems and all that. But give us a call, give us an email, Jonathan at leadingedgeplanning.com, Charlie at leadingedgeplanning.com. We'll answer your questions as best we can, have a conversation, and try to help us as best we can.
Leading Edge Financial Planning, LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Leading Edge Financial Planning and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.leadingedgeplanning.com. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. These documents may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. All information has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but its accuracy is not guaranteed. There is no representation or warranty as to the current accuracy, reliability, or completeness of, nor liability for, decisions based on such information, and it should not be relied on as such.